He didn't raise his voice that night. He raised something far more dangerous, and somehow, I stopped being afraid of it. I remember the first time I saw Sebastian Cain like people remember storms, not clearly, but with a feeling that lingers in your chest long after it's gone. It was raining, the kind of heavy Manhattan rain that turns streetlights into blurred halos and makes everything feel a little unreal. And I had been walking too fast, head down, trying to get out of it, trying to get home, trying to ignore the way the city always felt like it was watching me when I was alone. I didn't notice him at first. Not really. Just another man in a dark coat standing under the awning outside a building that probably cost more than I'd earn in 10 years. But then I felt it. That shift in the air, like the world had quietly decided to focus on one point. And somehow, that point was me. I slowed without meaning to, my shoes splashing through shallow puddles, my breath catching just enough to remind me I was tired, overworked, and completely out of place in a part of the city where everything looked polished and expensive. When I finally looked up, he was already looking at me, not casually, not the way strangers glance and move on, but like he had been waiting, like he had already decided something about me that I hadn't agreed to yet. His eyes didn't wander, didn't hesitate, just held mine with a kind of quiet control that made my fingers tighten around the strap of my bag. I told myself to keep walking, to ignore it, to be smart the way every woman learns to be, but my feet didn't move as fast as my thoughts. And in that half-second of hesitation, something shifted. "You're going to get soaked," he said, his voice low, steady, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. It wasn't a question, wasn't even concern exactly, more like an observation, like he was stating a fact about the world that included me whether I liked it or not. I should have said nothing, should have nodded and kept going, but instead I stopped, just for a second, just long enough to realize how close I was to him. How the rain seemed quieter under the awning, how the city noise faded like it had stepped back to watch. "I'm fine," I said, and even to my own ears, my voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. He tilted his head slightly, not amused, not impressed, just noting it, like he was cataloging every detail, every reaction. "You don't look fine," he replied, and there was something in the way he said it that made my chest tighten, not because it was threatening, but because it felt too accurate, like he had seen through the layers I spent years building. I took a step back then, instinct kicking in, that quiet alarm that tells you when something is different, when someone isn't just another face in the crowd. "I should go," I added, already turning, already trying to reclaim whatever control I had left. "Olivia Hayes," he said, and my name stopped me harder than any hand could have. The world narrowed in that instant. The rain, the lights, the passing cars, all of it fading behind the simple, impossible fact that he knew who I was. I turned back slowly, my heart beating just a little too fast, my mind scrambling for logic, for explanation, for anything that made sense. "How do you know my name?" I asked, and this time, my voice didn't hide the edge of fear. He didn't step closer, didn't need to, because the space between us already felt like it belonged to him. "Because I make it my business to know things," he said, calm, certain, like that answered everything. And maybe it did, because in that moment, I understood something without fully understanding it, that this wasn't random, wasn't coincidence, wasn't a passing interaction I could forget by morning. This was the beginning of something I hadn't chosen. I should have walked away then, should have ignored the way my instincts were pulling in two directions. Fear telling me to run, and something quieter, more dangerous, telling me to stay. But I didn't move, and neither did he. And for a few seconds that felt longer than they should have, we just stood there, the rain falling around us, the city holding its breath, and me realizing that whatever this was, whatever he was, it wasn't something I could simply escape. "You're afraid," he said, not accusing, not mocking, just stating it like another fact, like the rain, like the night, like the way I couldn't seem to leave. I swallowed, forcing my shoulders to straighten, forcing my voice to come out steady even when my pulse disagreed. "No," I said, and it was a lie, but it was also the first time I felt something else underneath it, something small but solid, like the beginning of resistance. His gaze didn't change, but something in it sharpened, like he noticed the difference, like he recognized the shift before I did. "Good," he replied quietly, and for a second, I didn't understand why that word felt heavier than it should have. Then he added, because fear is only useful if you learn what to do with it. And that was the moment everything changed, even if I didn't know it yet. Even if I still thought I was the one trying to leave, because standing there, under that dim light with the rain still falling, I realized that I wasn't just afraid of Sebastian Kane. I was standing at the edge of becoming something I had never been before, and somehow, he already knew it. I should have walked away after that, but instead I stood there long enough to realize that staying was already a mistake I could not undo. The rain had softened into a steady rhythm, tapping against the pavement like a quiet warning I was choosing to ignore, and Sebastian Kane did not move, did not rush, did not need to, because somehow the space between us felt controlled by him without a single step. I forced myself to take a breath, slow and deliberate, the way I did before difficult conversations, the way I did when I needed to remind myself that I still had a choice, even if it did not feel like it. You should not know things about me, I said, and this time my voice carried more strength, more edge, like I was testing the boundaries of whatever this was. His expression did not change, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something that looked almost like approval, and that unsettled me more than anything else. There are a lot of things you think should not happen, he replied, his tone calm, measured, like he was used to being questioned but never challenged. A black car pulled up to the curb behind him then, smooth and quiet. The kind of car you notice without wanting to, the kind that suggests money, influence, and a world I had spent my entire life staying far away from. I glanced at it, then back at him, and something tightened in my chest. Not fear exactly, not anymore, but awareness, like I was beginning to see the outline of a reality I had not asked to be part of. I am not getting in that car, I said quickly, before he could even speak, before he could even suggest it, and for a second, I thought I saw the corner of his mouth shift, not quite a smile, but close enough to feel intentional. I did not ask you to, he said, and that should have reassured me, but it did not, because it meant he did not need to ask. The driver stepped out, opening the back door with practiced precision, then waiting, silent, patient, like time itself worked differently around Sebastian Kane. Then what do you want? I asked, and this time I did not step back, did not look away, did not let the moment swallow me the way it had minutes ago. His gaze held mine, steady, unbroken, like he was measuring something I could not see. I want to understand why you are still standing here, he said, and the question caught me off guard, not because it was difficult, but because it forced me to admit something I had not said out loud. I should have left, should have walked past him, should have disappeared into the city like I always did, but I had not, and now I had to face that truth. Maybe I am tired of running, I answered, the words leaving my mouth before I could filter them, before I could turn them into something safer, something smaller. Silence followed, not empty, but full, like it carried weight neither of us was ready to drop. The rain picked up again, a little heavier this time, soaking through the edges of my jacket, but I did not move, and neither did he. Running from what? He asked, quietly, and there was something different in his voice now, something less controlled, less distant, like the question mattered more than he wanted it to. I hesitated, just for a second, because answering honestly felt dangerous. In a way I could not explain, but lying felt pointless, like he would see through it anyway. From people who think they can decide things for me, I said, and the moment the words settled between us, I saw it, the shift, subtle but undeniable. His jaw tightened slightly, his gaze sharpening, not in anger, not in threat, but in recognition, like I had said something that connected to him in a way neither of us expected. And you think I am one of those people, he said, not asking, just stating. And for the first time since I had met him, I felt something change inside me. Not fear, not exactly, but clarity. I straightened my shoulders, meeting his gaze without hesitation, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the answer matter. I think you could be, I replied, steady, certain, and the air between us shifted again, heavier, more defined, like an invisible line had been drawn. He studied me for a long moment, the city noise returning in the background, the car still waiting, the rain still falling, and then he nodded once, slow, deliberate, like he had reached a decision. Then do not let me be, he said, and those 4 words landed harder than anything else he had said, not because they were loud, but because they gave me something I had not expected, something I had not planned for. A choice. I blinked, the realization settling in, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. Because choices meant responsibility, meant I could not just be afraid anymore, could not just react and survive. I do not need your permission, I said. But even as I said it, I knew something had already changed, because I was not saying it to escape him. I was saying it to define myself in front of him. His gaze did not waver, but there was something new there now, something that felt less like control and more like attention, real attention, the kind that sees you instead of just observing you. Good, he said again, softer this time, like the word meant something different now, and then he stepped back, just one step, but it felt like space returning to the world, like the city exhaled around us. Get home safely, Olivia, he added, turning toward the car, the driver already moving. To close the door behind him. I stood there for a second longer, watching the car pull away into the rain, the taillights fading into the blur of the city, and for the first time since this started, I realized something that unsettled me in a completely different way. I was not shaking anymore, and that was the part that scared me most, because it meant whatever fear had been there before was already changing into something else, something I did not fully understand yet, but something Sebastian Kane had clearly seen before I did. I told myself it was over the moment that car disappeared into the rain, like whatever had just happened could be left behind on that sidewalk with the fading sound of tires on wet pavement. But the problem with moments like that is they do not end when you decide they should. They follow you home, sit with you in silence, and wait for you to admit they changed something. My apartment felt smaller than usual that night, like the walls had moved in a few inches while I was gone, the air heavier, quieter, every sound sharper than it should have been, and I stood by the door longer than necessary, my hand still resting on the handle as if part of me expected it to open again without warning. I finally locked it, slowly, deliberately, checking it twice even though I never did that. Then I crossed the room and dropped my bag onto the chair by the window, the city lights bleeding through the glass in soft, distorted lines. I should have felt relief, should have felt safe, but instead I felt alert, like something had been set in motion and I had not been given the instructions to stop it. I replayed every second in my head, the way he said my name, the way he looked at me like I was something he had already decided to understand, and that should have terrified me more than it did. But the truth was more complicated than that. I was not just afraid of Sebastian Kane. I was aware of him, and awareness is harder to ignore than fear. I moved through my routine on autopilot, changing out of damp clothes, making tea I did not drink, checking my phone even though I knew there would be nothing new there, and still, my mind kept circling back to him, to the way he had stepped back at the end, the way he had given me space instead of taking it. It did not fit, not with the version of him my instincts had built in those first few seconds, not with the kind of man who knows your name without asking. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until I had to break it just to prove I could. It does not matter, I said out loud, the words sounding weaker once they left my mouth, like they did not believe themselves. I lay down eventually, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the city, waiting for sleep that did not come easily, and when it finally did, it was light, restless, filled with fragments of rain and shadows and a voice that stayed calm no matter what I said. Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through the blinds. The kind of morning that feels unfinished, like the night had not fully let go. I moved through it slower than usual, my body tired but my mind too awake, too aware of something shifting just beneath the surface. I grabbed my coffee from the corner place down the street, the barista smiling the same way she always did, the normalcy of it almost jarring after everything that had not been normal the night before. I stepped back onto the sidewalk, blending into the morning rush, people moving past me with purpose, with direction, with lives that did not intersect with men, like Sebastian Kane, and I told myself that was still true for me too. I took a sip of coffee, too hot, barely tasting it, my thoughts already drifting somewhere else, somewhere I did not want to admit. That is when I saw it, not him, not directly, but the black car parked across the street, subtle enough to be overlooked, but not by me, not anymore. My steps slowed, just slightly. my grip tightening around the cup as I told myself I was imagining things, that the city was full of cars just like that, full of people who had nothing to do with me. The driver did not look at me, did not move, did not do anything that would confirm what my instincts were already telling me. But something in my chest shifted anyway. Not panic, not fear, something sharper, more focused. I could walk away, pretend I had not noticed, go about my day like nothing had changed. But that choice felt different now. Heavier, like it came with consequences I could not see yet. I straightened my shoulders, lifting my chin just enough to feel the difference. And instead of looking away, I looked directly at the car, holding my gaze there for a second. Longer than necessary. Nothing happened, no sudden movement, no signal, just silence. But it was enough. Because in that moment, I realized something that settled deep in my chest, steady and undeniable. I was not the same person who had stood in the rain the night before, and whatever game this was, whatever world had just brushed against mine, I was not going to play it the same way. I turned and kept walking, my pace measured, controlled, my thoughts clearer than they had been all night, and, for the first time, the idea of him watching did not make me shrink. It made me aware of how I stood, how I moved, how I chose. And somewhere between one step and the next, I understood the beginning of it. The shift he had seen before I did. The thing that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with me. Fear does not disappear. It changes shape. And if you are not careful, it either controls you or teaches you how to stand still when everything else is moving. And that morning, walking through a city that suddenly felt different, I realized I was done letting it control me. Control does not always look like force. Sometimes it looks like silence. And that morning I realized I was being given just enough of it to decide what I would do next. I kept walking, my steps steady, even though every instinct was still adjusting to the awareness that I was not alone in the way I used to be, not followed in a way that made noise or demanded attention, but observed, like I had stepped into a frame I could not fully see. The city moved around me the same as always, taxis, honking, people brushing past with coffee cups and headphones, but everything felt sharper, more deliberate, like I was noticing details I had ignored before. I reached my office building and paused just outside the glass doors, catching my reflection for a second longer than usual, checking for something I could not name, maybe fear, maybe hesitation, but all I saw was myself, shoulders straight, eyes focused, different in a way that did not show immediately, but was there if you looked long enough. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, letting the familiar routine wrap around me, the hum of conversation, the quiet clicking of keyboards, the normal world that should have grounded me, but instead felt like a place I was temporarily visiting. "Olivia, you are late." My supervisor called from across the room, not harsh, just factual, and I nodded, offering a quick apology as I moved to my desk, slipping into my chair, opening my laptop, pretending everything was exactly the same as it had been yesterday. But it was not, and I knew at the moment my phone buzzed against the surface of my desk. I froze for half a second, not because phones buzzing are unusual, but because something in me already knew this was different. I glanced at the screen, expecting a name, a number, something recognizable, but there was nothing, just a single message with no identification, no introduction, just words. "You made eye contact with the car." That was intentional. My breath caught, not in panic, but in recognition, the kind that settles quietly and refuses to leave. I looked up instinctively, scanning the room, but everything looked normal. People focused on their work, conversations low and distant, nothing out of place, nothing that explained how a message like that could arrive without warning. I picked up the phone slowly, reading it again, letting the meaning settle, letting the realization form without rushing it. He had been watching, not just last night, not just from a distance, but closely enough to notice a single choice, a single second where I decided not to look away. My first instinct was to ignore it, to put the phone down, to pretend it had not reached me. But that felt wrong, like stepping backward after already moving forward. I typed a response before I could overthink it. My fingers steady even as my mind raced. So was staying. I stared at the screen for a second after sending it, half expecting nothing, half expecting something immediate, something that would confirm the invisible line I had just crossed. The reply came faster than I thought it would, just 2 words this time. "I noticed." I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair, the noise of the office returning in pieces around me, but none of it fully reaching me, because my focus had shifted somewhere else entirely. This was not random, not coincidence, not something I could dismiss as curiosity or chance. This was deliberate, controlled, measured, and I was part of it whether I liked it or not. But something else settled in alongside that realization. Something quieter, steadier, something that did not feel like fear anymore. It felt like awareness turning into choice. I placed my phone face down on the desk, not hiding it, not avoiding it, just setting it aside like I had decided when to engage and when not to. And for the first time since this started, I felt a small, undeniable shift in control, not over him, not over the situation, but over myself. I turned back to my screen, focusing on the work in front of me, letting my breathing even out, letting the rhythm of normal life settle just enough to keep me grounded. But in the back of my mind, the message remained, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a reminder. I had been seen, and instead of shrinking from it, I had responded. And that, more than anything else, was something he had not just expected, but something he had been waiting for. Because as the minutes passed and the morning continued, I realized something that made my pulse steady instead of spike. This was no longer about being watched. It was about how I chose to stand when I knew I was. Power does not arrive all at once. It builds in quiet decisions, in small moments where you choose not to step back even when it would be easier. And by the time the afternoon settled over the city, I could feel it growing inside me in a way I had never experienced before. The hours passed slower than usual, each task at my desk completed with precision, not because I suddenly cared more about spreadsheets or reports, but because I needed control somewhere, needed to remind myself that I could still direct something in my life even if I could not fully see the edges of what I had stepped into. I did not check my phone again for a long time, not because I forgot about it, but because I chose not to, and that distinction mattered more than I expected. When I finally turned it over, the screen remained dark, no new messages, no follow-up, nothing that demanded my attention. And that silence felt intentional, like he was waiting, like he understood that control was not about constant presence, but about knowing when to step back. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, letting that realization settle into something steady instead of something unsettling. He was not trying to overwhelm me. He was observing, adjusting, letting me reveal myself without pressure, and that made this something entirely different from anything I had known before. I finished my work earlier than usual, closing my laptop with a quiet click that felt louder than it should have. My coworkers still wrapped in their routines, unaware that my world had shifted just a few degrees off its normal axis. I gathered my things, slipping my phone into my bag without hesitation, and walked out of the building into the late afternoon light. The sky a muted gray that reflected off the glass towers around me. The street was busy, people moving with purpose, taxis lining the curb, the usual rhythm of the city continuing without pause. And for a moment, I let myself blend into it. Just another person heading home, just another story moving through the crowd. But that feeling did not last long, because awareness does not disappear once it has been triggered. It lingers, sharp and quiet, waiting for you to acknowledge it. I crossed the street, my steps measured, my gaze forward, and then I saw him. Not hidden, not distant, but standing across the sidewalk like he had been there the entire time, like the city had simply arranged itself around his presence. Sebastian Kane did not wave, did not call out, did not move toward me. He just stood there, hands in his coat pockets, watching, the same calm intensity in his eyes that had unsettled me the night before. Except this time, it did not hit me the same way. My pulse quickened, but it did not spike. My breath caught, but it did not falter, and that difference was everything. I stopped a few feet away from him, close enough to feel the shift in the air again, that quiet pressure that seemed to follow him wherever he went. And for a second, neither of us spoke, the noise of the city filling the space between us without breaking it. "You chose to come outside," he said finally, his voice even, almost conversational, but layered with something more, something that made it clear he had been paying attention to more than just where I was. I lifted my chin slightly, meeting his gaze without hesitation, the movement small but deliberate. "I was always going to," I replied. And the truth of that statement settled between us like something solid. His eyes flickered, just briefly, like he had registered the difference in my tone, the absence of something that had been there before. You are adjusting faster than most, he said, and there was no judgment in it, no praise, just observation, like he was stating another fact about the world. I felt something shift again at those words, not pride, not fear, something steadier, something that felt like alignment. Maybe I am just not interested in being afraid anymore, I said, and this time, there was no hesitation, no second guessing, just certainty. The corner of his mouth moved slightly, not enough to be called a smile, but enough to change the expression on his face in a way that felt intentional. Fear is not the problem, he replied quietly, taking a single step closer, closing the distance just enough to make the moment more defined. What you do with it is. I held my ground, not stepping back, not breaking eye contact, letting the weight of his words settle without letting them push me anywhere I did not choose to go. The city continued around us, people passing by, unaware of the shift taking place in a space that looked ordinary from the outside. And in that moment, I understood something that made everything else fall into place. This was not about him controlling me, not anymore. This was about whether I would let the fear I had felt define me or refine me. And standing there, just a few feet away from a man who could change the direction of an entire room without raising his voice, I realized I had already made that decision. Because I did not move, I did not look away, and for the first time since this began, I was not reacting to him. I was choosing how I stood in front of him, and that was the moment he noticed it too. The moment he stepped closer, I understood something I had not before. Distance was not what defined control, it was presence, and Sebastian Cain had a way of filling space without touching it, without forcing it, without needing to. I did not step back, not because I was trying to prove something to him, but because I no longer felt the instinct to retreat the way I had before. And that realization settled deeper than anything he could have said. The air between us felt different now, not heavy, not threatening, just focused, like everything unnecessary had fallen away and what remained was sharp and intentional. You are watching me, I said, not accusing, not uncertain, just stating it the way he had done the night before, matching his tone, his calm, and I saw it again, that flicker in his eyes, that brief acknowledgement that I had stepped into his rhythm instead of resisting it. Yes, he answered. No hesitation, no denial, just truth delivered without decoration, and for a second, I expected that to unsettle me, expected the weight of it to press down, but it did not in the way it should have. Instead, it clarified something I had been circling since this started. Why? I asked, and this time I did not rush the word, did not soften it. I let it stand between us, direct and unavoidable. He studied me for a moment, not searching for an answer, but deciding how much to give, and I realized then that everything about him was deliberate, every word, every silence, every step forward and back. Because you did not leave, he said finally. And the simplicity of that answer hit harder than anything complicated could have. I felt my brows pull together. Slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition. Because he was right. I had been given multiple chances to walk away, to disappear back into a version of my life that did not include him, and I had not taken them. That is not a reason, I replied, but even as I said it, I knew it was more than that. His gaze did not shift, but there was something steadier in it now, something that felt less like observation and more like engagement. It is for me, he said, and then, after a brief pause, he added, most people leave when they sense something they cannot control. The words settled between us, quiet but precise, and I felt something align inside me again, like pieces of a thought finally connecting. I crossed my arms loosely, not defensive, just grounding myself in the moment, anchoring the clarity I was beginning to feel. And you think I want control? I asked, not challenging, just exploring the line he had drawn. He shook his head once, slow, almost thoughtful. I think you want choice, he said, and that word landed differently, softer but more exact, like he had adjusted his understanding in real time. I exhaled slowly, my gaze dropping for a brief second before returning to his, because that was the truth, the thing I had not said out loud but had been shaping everything I did since I met him. Then stop taking it away, I said, and the sentence came out steadier than I expected, clearer, like it had been waiting to be spoken. Silence followed. Not tense, not uncertain, just present. And in that silence, I saw it. The shift, subtle but undeniable. The way his posture adjusted. The way his focus narrowed, not in dominance, but in consideration. No one had said that to him before. Not like that. Not without fear attached to it. And I realized that was the difference. Not what I was saying, but how I was saying it. I am not taking it, he replied, his voice quieter now, not weaker, just more measured. I am showing you where it exists. I held his gaze, letting that statement settle, testing it against everything I had experienced since this began. And for the first time, I did not reject it immediately. I examined it. Then make sure it stays mine, I said. And the moment the words left my mouth, I felt it, the line I had drawn, not just for him, but for myself. His expression did not change much, but there was something new in his eyes, something that had not been there before, something that looked a lot like respect. He gave a small nod, not agreement exactly, but acknowledgement, like he understood the boundary even if he had not expected it to be placed there. That depends on you, he said, and then he stepped back again, creating space, returning control of the moment in a way that felt intentional. I did not follow, did not close the distance. I stayed where I was, letting the space exist, letting the balance hold. The city noise filled in around us again, the rhythm of movement returning. But something had shifted permanently, something that would not return to what it was before, because in that moment, standing across from a man who had been watching, testing, measuring every reaction, I realized I was no longer reacting the way he expected. I was responding on my own terms, and that was the difference he had been waiting for all along. Respect is quieter than control, and I recognized it the moment he stepped back and did not try to close the distance again, like he understood that something had shifted and forcing it would break whatever balance had just formed between us. I watched him for a second longer than necessary, not because I was unsure, but because I was confirming it, testing whether this version of the moment would hold or collapse under pressure. And when it did not, when he simply stood there with that same steady presence but without the edge of control that had defined him before, I realized I had done something I had never done in situations like this. I had set a boundary, and it had not been ignored. You are different today, he said after a moment, his voice calm, observational, but carrying a weight that made it clear he was not commenting lightly. I tilted my head slightly, not dismissing it, not accepting it fully either, just acknowledging the statement for what it was. Maybe I am just paying attention now, I replied, and the truth of that felt solid, grounded in something that had been building since the night before. His gaze held mine, steady, focused, and I could see the calculation there again. But it was different now, less about control, more about understanding, like he was adjusting to a variable he had not fully accounted for. Most people pay attention too late, he said, and there was something in his tone that hinted at experience, at patterns he had seen repeat over and over again. I crossed my arms again, not defensive, just anchoring myself, keeping the center I had found from slipping away. Then maybe I am not most people, I answered, and the words came out without hesitation, not as a challenge, but as a statement of fact. A brief silence followed, and in that silence, something shifted again, subtle but clear, the way his posture relaxed just slightly, the way his focus sharpened in a different direction, like he was no longer measuring how I would react, but what I would choose next. No, he said quietly, almost to himself, you are not. The acknowledgement settled between us, not heavy, not overwhelming, just present, and for the first time, I felt something that was not fear, not even awareness, but something closer to steadiness, like I was standing on ground that would not move beneath me. A car passed behind me, the sound pulling my attention for a brief second before returning to him, the city continuing its rhythm around us, indifferent to whatever this moment was becoming. So what happens now? I asked, not because I needed direction, but because I wanted to see how he would answer when control was no longer assumed. He did not respond immediately, and that hesitation was new, not weakness, but consideration, like he was choosing his words with more care than before. Now you decide if you walk away, he said, and the simplicity of that answer carried more weight than anything else he could have offered. I felt the shift again, deeper this time, because he was not guiding the outcome. He was placing it in front of me and stepping back. I looked at him for a long second, studying the details I had noticed before but understood differently now. The way he held himself, the quiet confidence, the control that was still there but no longer pressing against me. And I realized something that settled into my chest with surprising clarity. Walking away was still an option, but it was no longer the only one that felt right. And if I do not? I asked, not testing him, just exploring the path I was already considering. His expression did not change much, but there was a subtle shift in his eyes, something that looked almost like anticipation, like he was waiting to see if I would fully step into the choice I had been circling. Then you stay, he said, simple, direct, no conditions attached, no hidden demand behind it. I let the words sit for a moment, feeling the weight of them, not heavy, but significant, because staying meant something different now. It was not being pulled, not being kept. It was choosing to remain in a space that challenged me. I uncrossed my arms slowly, letting them fall to my sides, a small movement, but one that felt like a decision in itself. I am not staying for you, I said, my voice steady, clear, not defensive, just honest. His gaze did not waver, but there was a shift there again, something that looked like understanding, like he recognized the importance of that distinction. I would not expect you to, he replied, and for a second, something almost like approval passed between us. Not spoken, not obvious, but there if you knew where to look. The city moved around us, people passing by, unaware that something had just been redefined in a way that would not easily be undone. And as I stood there, no longer stepping back, no longer reacting out of instinct, I realized the truth of what had been building since the beginning. I was not standing in his world anymore. I was standing in my own, and for the first time, he was the one adjusting to it. Staying is easy when you do not understand the cost, but the moment you realize what it means, that is when the decision becomes real. And as I stood there in front of Sebastian Kane, I felt that weight settle in, not heavy enough to push me back, but solid enough to make every step forward intentional. The city continued moving around us, people passing within inches, conversations blending into background noise, but none of it reached the space we were standing in, like everything unnecessary had faded and only the moment remained. He did not rush me, did not fill the silence, and that restraint said more than anything else could have, because it meant he understood that this was no longer about pulling me into his world. It was about whether I would step into it on my own terms. I let out a slow breath, grounding myself, feeling the steadiness I had built over the past. Hours settled deeper, more natural now, less forced. If I stay, it is not because I am curious, I said, my voice even, deliberate, not defensive, just clear, and I watched closely to see how he would respond to that boundary. His gaze did not shift, but there was a quiet acknowledgement there, like he had expected nothing less. Curiosity fades, he replied, his tone calm, almost distant. This would not. The words were not a warning, not exactly, but they carried a truth that made me pause. For a fraction of a second longer than I intended. He was not offering something temporary, not creating a moment that could be easily forgotten. He was defining the scale of what this was. I tilted my head slightly, studying him, not intimidated, but measuring, the same way he had been measuring me since the beginning. Then you should understand why I am not stepping into anything blindly, I said, and this time, there was a quiet firmness behind the words, something that did not ask for agreement but did not allow dismissal either. A subtle shift crossed his expression, not resistance, not challenge, but recognition, like he understood the rule I had just placed between us. I would not expect you to, he said, and there was something in the way he said it that felt different, less like control, more like alignment, like he was adjusting to the structure I was building instead of breaking it. I nodded once, not in agreement with him, but in acknowledgement of the balance forming, and then I took a step to the side, not away, not toward, just shifting the angle of the moment, reclaiming the space around me as my own. Then we are clear, I said, and the words felt final in a way that grounded everything else. For a second, neither of us moved, and in that stillness, something settled, something that had not existed before this moment, not tension, not uncertainty, but something closer to understanding. He was not trying to control the outcome anymore, and I was not trying to escape it. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, glancing at the screen, not because I needed to, but because it was a normal action, something that anchored me back into the world outside of. This moment, when I looked up again, his attention had not wavered, but it had changed, less like observation, more like presence, like he was no longer watching for a reaction, but waiting for a decision. I have a life outside of this, I said, meeting his gaze again. The statement simple but necessary, because it defined the boundary he could not cross. I know, he replied, without hesitation, without question. And that answer told me more than anything else he could have said, because it meant he had seen it, acknowledged it, and was choosing not to dismiss it. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, not relief, but something close, something that felt like the confirmation of a line being respected. Then it stays that way, I said, and this time, there was no room for interpretation, no space for misunderstanding. He gave a small nod, the movement minimal but intentional, and in that nod, I saw it, the acceptance of a boundary that most people in his position would have ignored. The city noise pressed back in around us, louder now, more present, and I realized the moment was shifting again, not ending, but evolving into something that would not be confined to a single encounter. I stepped back, not retreating, just repositioning, reclaiming my movement, my direction, and for the first time since this began, I felt completely in control of where I was standing. I am going home, I said, not asking, not explaining, just stating the next step, and this time, there was no hesitation in it. His gaze followed me for a second, then he nodded once more, not stopping me, not questioning it. Then go, he said, and there was something in his tone that made it clear he meant it, not as permission, but as acknowledgement of my choice. I turned and started walking, my steps steady, my mind clear, the city unfolding in front of me the way it always had, but different now, sharper, more defined. And as I moved away from him, I realized something that settled deep and certain inside me, something that had been building from the very first moment I met him. This was no longer about whether I would be pulled into his world. It was about how I would stand if I chose to step into it. And for the first time, I was not afraid of that answer. Walking away should have felt like an ending, like a clean break between whatever that moment was and the life I had built before it. But as I moved through the city streets with steady steps and a calm I did not recognize from myself just days ago, I understood something had not ended. It had shifted into something quieter, something that would not demand my attention but would remain there, waiting. The evening air had cooled, the sky fading into that deep blue that sits between day and night, and the lights of the city began to take over, reflections stretching across glass and pavement like a world layered on top of itself. I reached my apartment building and paused again, not out of hesitation this time, but out of awareness, noticing how different everything felt when I was not moving out of instinct but out of choice. I stepped inside, the familiar hallway, the sound of distant televisions behind closed doors, the quiet hum of everyday life continuing untouched, and for the first time, I did not feel like I was returning to safety. I felt like I was bringing something new with me. I unlocked my door and stepped in, closing it behind me with a soft click, and the silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt steady, like the absence of noise was no longer something to fill, but something to stand within. I set my bag down, moved through the small routines that had always grounded me, but now they felt different, not smaller, not insignificant, just clearer, like I could see them for what they were without the weight of something pressing against me. I walked to the window and looked out at the city below, the movement of cars, the glow of streetlights, the constant rhythm that never really stopped, and I realized I was no longer looking at it the same way. Before, it had been something I moved through carefully, something I navigated to avoid disruption, to stay unnoticed, to remain within the lines that kept everything predictable. Now, it looked like something else entirely, something open, something that did not define me unless I let it. My phone buzzed again. The sound sharp in the quiet room, and I did not rush to it this time. I let it sit for a second, letting the choice form before the action. When I finally picked it up, the message was simple, just one line, no name, no number, just the same presence behind it. You walked away without looking back. I read it once, then again, not because I needed to understand it, but because I wanted to feel my reaction to it, to see what had changed. I moved to the edge of the couch and sat down, the phone resting in my hand as I let the silence stretch, the city lights flickering softly through the window. He had noticed, of course he had, but the difference was that it did not feel like pressure, it felt like acknowledgement. I typed slowly, deliberately, not rushing the words, not softening them, just letting them be exactly what they were. I did not need to. I stared at the message for a second before sending it, not questioning it, just confirming it. Then I pressed send and set the phone down beside me. The reply did not come immediately this time, and that delay felt intentional, like the rhythm between us had shifted again, less reactive, more measured. I leaned back against the couch, letting my gaze drift back to the window, the reflection of the city lights faintly visible against the glass. And for a moment, everything felt still in a way that did not demand anything from me. When the phone buzzed again, I did not move right away. I let it happen, let the sound exist without urgency. Then I reached for it and looked. That is when it changes. The message read, and the simplicity of it carried more meaning than anything else he had said. I felt something settle into place. At those words, not confusion, not uncertainty, but recognition, like I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, not because of him, but because of myself. I set the phone down again, this time without any hesitation, without any need to respond, because I understood that not every moment required an answer. Some moments simply required acknowledgement. I stood and walked back to the window, resting my hand lightly against the cool glass, looking out at the city that had always felt larger than me, more powerful, more controlling in ways I could not define. But now, it did not feel that way, not entirely, because somewhere between fear and awareness, between instinct and choice, I had found something that did not come from the world around me, something that could not be taken or given, something that only existed if I chose it. I exhaled slowly, my reflection faint in the glass, steady, composed, different. He may have ruled his world with control, with presence, with a kind of power that shaped everything around him. But standing there, in the quiet of my own space, I understood the truth that had been building since the beginning. He could watch me, he could understand me, he could even challenge me, but he could not define me. And that was the moment I realized the shift was complete, not because I had become something else, but because I had finally chosen what I already was. And for the first time, that choice felt stronger than anything he could ever offer or take.